All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Hello, everyone joining us on Zoom and joining us on Facebook. I'm Liz Perry, the president of Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of do our introductions that we sometimes do on slides verbally. First of all, we always start our webinars with our land acknowledgement that our campus here, the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits and where we all work and reside. Our mission-related work would not be possible at all without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. We are grateful to all Indigenous people and support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands, which really ties directly into our mission at Crow Canyon to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. And if you have not already, please check us out at www.crowcanyon.org. As we start our Zoom, remember if my head or picture of my head gets too big, you can just grab the black bar between the PowerPoint presentation and the pictures and move it over to the right. If you're having trouble with Zoom, go ahead and head on over to our live stream on Facebook at crowcanyon.org/Facebook. And you can also see our webinars later if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Upcoming in the next couple of weeks on our webinar series, we have the Four Corners lecture series that we're hosting with Sand, Stone, and Songs, Ancient Lessons from a Living Landscape with Vincent McMillan next week. And then the week after that, we have Altered Landscapes with Michael Naminga. So we are really looking forward to those. And without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our distinguished presenter today, Dr. Andrew Curley, who has his PhD from Cornell in development sociology and is currently a professor at the University of Arizona School of Geography, Development, and Environment, who's going to talk to us today on his research on dams, rights, and colonial water systems along the Colorado River. Welcome, Dr. Curley. Thank you so much for joining us and presenting.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation. Ya'at'e, everyone, all my Diné friends, colleagues, and relatives. As was mentioned, I'm Andrew Curley, and I'm an assistant professor in geography at the University of Arizona, that is on the unceded lands of the Tana Adam peoples nation, the Yaqui people, and then Apache nations that historically lived in the area. I am currently in New Hampshire, as it turns out, live streaming from the unceded lands of Abenaki people. So I wanted to acknowledge the lands on which I'm doing this presentation, as well as the lands that I also work. The title of my presentation, The Making of Drought, is a reference to a very influential English historian that I draw upon, and so does my mentor and other people, E.P. Thompson, who wrote this famous book called The Making of the English Working Class. And if you read anything from that book, you can start with just the preface or the introduction, in which the author talks about why he chooses the term making and what does that do analytically, and in our minds, how does it get us to understand something that we're observing different from just describing in detail what those things are, and to just give those things descriptive characteristics. The making refers to a process of building up a history, a point at which change was allowed to happen or limited, basically referring to the historical process that allows for things that exist today to exist where they are. So that's a little bit different than traditional sociology or political science, or even some anthropology, where you're looking at something and you're trying to describe the characteristics of it. And so when we're looking at questions of drought, rather than just focusing on what are the markers of drought and how are we understanding drought, which is part of what I'm going to talk about, but how did that idea of drought and how did drought become an actual social political phenomena on top of an environmental phenomenon. So those are the ways that I'm kind of trying to get us to rethink how we think about these issues. We can start by looking at some of the headlines that we see in the national narratives of the Colorado River, a river that is familiar to most of us in the Southwest. It's a river that mega cities like Phoenix, Los Angeles, and others, well, not necessarily Los Angeles, but Phoenix and Tucson, utilize directly as a form of water, a water source, and that are, you know, the basis for urban growth as well as agricultural expansion in the region for many decades. And currently, we are at a historic point in the recent history of the river where even the United States overseers, in the form of the Bureau of Reclamation and state water units, have issued and are abiding by mandatory reductions in the distribution of Colorado River water to the various cities, communities, and users that have been, you know, tapping into the river and using it for various purposes. This is seen as an unprecedented change in the river's levels, and is attributed to, as you can see in this headline, historic drought, and the idea of drought as a thing that's causing us to do certain things with the river, namely reducing our use of the water. And many of the features and factors that contribute to drought, as we understand it, are coming from things that we are associating with climate change, declining precipitation into form of snow or rain, faster melting snow and snowpack, and just you know, less rain overall, less water coming in to the river, causing less water to maintain. Now, the problem with these narratives that I'm finding, and me and some other researchers that are working on these issues, is that they're not including other kinds of factors, other kinds of features of the river that are also impacting its flow, that are also impacting the levels of water that are available, the amount of water, or even the idea of the total amount of water and where that comes from. And that's mainly in the form of dams and other kinds of diversions along the Colorado River. Most of you are familiar with these dams, like the Hoover Dam or the Glen Canyon Dam, which was featured in the first slide of this presentation. And these are, I'm arguing, environmental intrusions greater on scale and impact than some of the factors of climate change that we're talking about. Not to discard those points of climate change and the threat of climate change, but to say that some of the most impactful intrusions onto the river are pre-existing and coming historically over time, and have created the conditions for drought that we understand today, the making of drought, in other words. And so that's something that we have to think about historically, as well as in contemporary times and in our present crisis. Let's see, there we go. One way that we're thinking about it, me and a colleague of mine, a collaborator on a couple articles, Sarah Smith, who's a geographer at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, we're talking about this in terms of scenes and temporalities. And basically, this is a fancy way of talking about time and the way that time is understood and the political work that time does. So it's not time in just the abstract, but time in application. So when we're thinking about crisis, there's an insinuated time frame involved. So it's to say the levels are at such, and therefore what's going to happen is, you know, drought is going to continue to occur or get worse. There's going to be less water available. Cities are going to run out of water. Apocalypse is going to happen. Everybody's going to be in a Mad Max scenario sooner or later. That's kind of like in our imaginations when we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about certain kinds of effects of the environmental change and how it impacts people. And what happens with the way time works in these narratives, including the the article that I just mentioned is that it forgets things in the past. So when you're focused on the future, you're forgetting things in the past. And that's not to say that the future isn't full of crises and things to worry about, but it's also to pay attention to the existing crises that continue to perpetuate. And that's something that Indigenous people, Indigenous scholarship, people like me working on the Indigenous topics in other social sciences point out over and over again, is that there are existing structures of colonialism that have created some of the worst environmental impacts that we can think about, but are not included in how we're talking about climate change or thinking about climate change. And that's the politics of time and the way that time works within our climate narratives. And this is just a fancy way that we talk about it in academic language, but the way I just summarize it is kind of the main points that we're trying to have take away. So to give you a further history of that, like, let's look back at the history of the Colorado River as it's understood by settler colonialists, as it's understood by non-native, non-indigenous, mainly white people moving into the region and appropriating the water sources for their uses. Now, what they were working with was an ideology, a way of thinking, a cultural understanding of the environment in which they have to dominate it, in which they have to appropriate it and utilize all aspects of it. A river that flows to the sea is a river that's wasted in some of their understandings of water. So they need to capture it, divert it, measure it, quantify it, and award certain kinds of legal political rights around it. That's the whole set of water laws that we have in the Western states, and water laws that are based on notions of prior appropriation and beneficial use. And in some cases, although we're starting to move away from this use it or lose it principles, meaning you have to lose all your appropriations, use your appropriations, or you're going to lose it, which incentivizes wasteful water use. Now, this political imagination that came with the settler colonialists was one that was tied to our ideas of science that was about altering the river. So it's like sometimes we have this cliche understanding of science as this impartial way of understanding the world, as if it's this thing that exists in and of itself, without political influence, without a sense of cultural understanding. And everybody else has culture. Science doesn't have culture. Science has objectivity. But if you look at the practice of science, science is being deployed over and over again, even into today, for political ends that are serving other kinds of cultural understandings. In this case, the project of irrigation, the project of modernization and transformation of the environment to meet the development and progress narratives of settler colonialists coming into the region. So they came into the Colorado region, the Colorado Basin, the territory of New Mexico, and then eventually Arizona, and started to measure water. And the whole purpose of quantifying water and making the Colorado River known in the minds of scientists and then eventually state planners was in order to divert it. It wasn't just to know the river for its own sake, but to act upon it. So then you know how much water is there, at which point you can divide it, you can give it to the states, award it, and that is the basis for our water allocation to this day. Early hydrological science was instrumental in getting us to this point. And what I'm showing you here are some of the early machinery used in order to understand this. The hydrological measuring tools at the time, the Waltman meter, which was measuring the amount of water and trying to quantify how much water is going through the meter at a given time over a period of time, and from which you can project a total amount of water that goes in that passes through the river during a year. And the picture on the right is a 1906 map of where a lot of these hydrological data points were and where measurement was being made. And that you can see most of these are upstream in tributaries in Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, where based on the assumption that these states are contributing most of the water into the Colorado River, and so therefore need to be measured. The larger effect of this is that the water was overestimated at 15 million acre feet a year to pass through the Colorado River. And and then consequently over allocated. It was divided at Lee's Ferry in 1922 based on the Colorado Compact, and the lower basin states got 7.5 million acre feet, and the upper basin states got 7.5 million acre feet. Now we realize there's much less water, or that the river fluctuates over time and is not within the measurements of, sorry, my microphone went out. Can you hear me still? You're going to have to interrupt my presentation and tell me you hear me.
I hear you. You're fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Apologies. But yeah, so the river was divided and based on these estimates, and now we realize that those estimates had some flaws to them and that were incomplete. The science only goes back as far as 1906. So that's part of the project, and that's part of the problem. And it creates this dystopia for Indigenous nations. So I use this loaded language purposefully because it is creating two different kinds of experiences on the ground. So when you're talking about the making of Arizona, and you're talking about how the transformation of the environment was geared towards a certain kind of project, the modernization of Arizona in the forms of irrigation, dams, and eventually urban expansion, it was at the expense of the livelihoods and life possibilities for the Indigenous nations that have been living here for hundreds of years and have not over allocated the Colorado River. For during our entire time here, we never caused this kind of crisis on the river. You can see in the state seal, like I use this often when teaching as a representation of the ideology of Arizona, how it views itself. This is a seal that you probably get stamped on every official document from the state and is adopted to give you a sense of what the state is about. It's about you can see featured here, I can't even find the words expressed just how much the state's vision of itself is about environmental transformation. You see there's a minor, it's inserting a kind of a patriarchal relationship with the environment, a one where there's a white man on top of a pickaxe and a shovel. And, you know, it's referring to the extractive history of the state, you know, the copper state, the reason why the star and the flag is copper. You know, it's all about a celebration of the extractive economy historically in the state, then one that continues into today. And then you have in the background the dams, the damming up of the rivers, not only the Colorado River, but the Salt River and other rivers in the state, for the purposes of large scale monoculture cash crop agriculture. This is not a kind of agriculture that's for subsistence or sustainability. It's for cash exportation and the emergence of a capitalist economy within the region. And also you see in the middle ground of this image, cattle, which is referring to the rangeland that was, you know, taken from Indigenous nations and given to cowboys as part of that culture in Arizona. And so all of these are the industries that are prioritized in the state, that are part of the ideology of what the state thinks of itself. And it's you don't have to take my word for it. It's in the description of the Great Seal of Arizona that's on their website. I just took this off the state's website. So it says it for itself. You can see this demonstrated in this dramatic environmental transformation demonstrated in the way that the rivers were dammed. And this is an image of the Roosevelt Dam being constructed up on the Salt River, in the Salt River Valley, for these purposes of irrigation, in order to hold back water and then divert it for agriculture, and to control the river for unpredictability of water that might flood communities that build right alongside it. So these are the kinds of environmental transformation damming has done. It changed the flow of the river. Today, you can go into Phoenix and see no water in the Salt River Valley or in the Salt River. And this is not only because of the damming of the river, but from also overuse of groundwater pumping, from what I understand. And this not only affects Phoenix and the Salt River Valley, but the rivers that are alongside in Tucson, and I imagine other communities in the Western states. So what I'm saying here is
that these dams are as big of an environmental transformation as you can imagine with drought and with desertification and the other kinds of impacts that we forecast with climate change. Yet we don't talk about this as a point of climate change, and we don't even talk about the damming as a form of colonialism and a colonial imposition on the indigenous nations that were here. Now, this ideology, going back to the state seal, concretizing the making of dams and holding back of water in the Colorado region, built up in scale and in hubris to the point where in the 1960s, state planners believed they could engineer water moving almost like a highway, like an interstate between basins, calculated and controlled by humans for whatever purposes they need. If Phoenix needed more water, they can draw upon water from the Columbia Basin. So what this map is showing you is major drainage areas in the Western United States. You can see that in the map, but it's coming out of the Stewart-Udall papers, which are housed in the special collections at the University of Arizona. And this was in a group of papers where Stewart-Udall is thinking about these large mega projects that the federal government can sponsor, and thinking, especially at this time, thinking about creating a canal system between the Columbia Basin and the Colorado Basin. You can see how deceptive the basin map shows these connections, right? It says, look, you get to the edge of the Colorado River Basin and you're already at the Columbia Basin. All you need is a canalway to connect the two, and you can have water flowing in from Washington into central Arizona with the flip of a switch. So these are the kinds of high modernist thinking, the kinds of imaginaries that are at work in the state making, in the construction of new infrastructures throughout the region, which are ignoring and actively denying indigenous land and water claims at the same time. The whole idea is to plan for future cities. Again, the way time becomes politicized here. Phoenix was not as big as it was today. You were not building these infrastructures in order to meet existing demand, but to meet expected future demands, under this idea of growth that is part of the capitalist economy. So that's, this is the kind of modernist thinking that goes into the transformation of the West and the way in which environmental change is brought on by humans more than 60 years ago by this point. Now, Stewart-Udall was not able to accomplish that huge project because, in many ways, because of funding. The Vietnam War took out a lot of funding that the federal government could even spend on Johnson's Great Society program. So a lot of federal funding eventually went into war production. But what Stewart-Udall was able to get past, what was a long-standing objective of the state of Arizona, was the Central Arizona Project, the most important infrastructure in the state of Arizona, one that is critical for the continuation of Phoenix and Tucson today, that brings water in from the Colorado River into Maricopa County and into Tucson. And you can see these are early maps of how the conceptualization of this project played out over time. And these are coming out of 1965, 1966 from the same archives. And the reason why I was looking at these maps and why I originally started looking at CAP in the first place is because this is the origin point of the Navajo coal economy. So my research, my work prior to looking at water was looking at coal mining on the Navajo Nation. And I was asking myself, where did this power plant come from? What was the purpose of this power plant? This was the Navajo generating station. And the purpose of it, as you can see here, this thermal power plant assumed location was tied to the construction of the Central Arizona Project, tied to the making of this of these canals and these water infrastructure for the colonial part of the state. And what was needed was a reliable and a tremendous amount of power, and that was in the form of a coal-fired power plant. There were proposed hydroelectric dams on either side of the Grand Canyon that were opposed by environmental groups, including the Sierra Club at the time. The NGS power plant was the environmental compromise in the 1960s and became the energy source for CAP for many years, only recently closed down and demolished when CAP found ways of getting satisfying its power demands through other means, which I'm still unclear about where it's getting its power. I mean, I did email them and ask them what, if you look on their website, they say that their source is market future purchases, which I don't know what that means. It's very vague. It's not coming from a specific place like NGS as it did before, but from this market of energy that can move around, which, you know, asks you what kind of, like, leads you to ask what kind of energy is being consumed. The important point of that is CAP is still the largest energy consumer in the state of Arizona. Nothing consumes more energy than CAP. Nothing consumes more energy, and arguably up until this point produce more carbon emissions than the moving of water from the Colorado River into Phoenix and Tucson. So you got to think about that when you're thinking about the sustainability of these cities. So anyway, so that's you know, that's how these infrastructures incorporate indigenous lands and incorporate indigenous places. And it even gets worse than this, and I'll show you in a second. But going back to the original point, or one of the original points about how dams are not being considered as part of our climate crisis, you can take a look now at how hydrological sciences today are building off of those earlier approaches shown in the first couple slides, and how in this formula is shown here, natural flow, how the reservoirs are being incorporated into our understanding of what's natural on the Colorado River, which is really kind of outlandish from an indigenous point of view to think that these colonial infrastructures are seen as natural. So when you're thinking about the declining reservoir rates, when you think about the declining levels of Lake Powell as a basis by which you're thinking about the effects of climate change, you're using colonial impositions as a measurement to understand climate crisis without acknowledging that colonial intrusion in the first place. It's just naturalizing colonialism into the background of the landscape, which is how colonialism becomes structured and continues to repeat the social and economic difference between places like Phoenix and Tucson and the Navajo Nation, the Havasupai Nation, the Hopi Nation, and other nations in the northern, northeastern part of the state. So it just becomes part of even the way science calculates the effects of climate change, which is absurd if you think about it. What's also absurd is my inability to move slides after being on Zoom for so long. Now, how this also has impacted the Navajo Nation is that when CAP was originally constructed, it had a lot of pushback from upper basin users, namely a congressman out of southwestern Utah named Wayne Aspinall. And although Arizona was finally able to compromise with legislatures from California, with the governor, with the representatives and senators, a compromise that gave California priority rights over Arizona water in the law of the river, that political momentum was stalled somewhat by the upper basin users. When California got behind Arizona to take a legislation to fund CAP, to get the federal government to fund this large infrastructure project, Wayne Aspinall foot dragged through the House Insular Committee and was preventing this resolution from going up for a vote until Arizona conceded to certain demands. And one of them was to offset some more water, because he believed that when CAP was built, that would drain more water out of the upper basin, that eventually the demands of Arizona would get so great that they would supersede what was already allocated in the Colorado Compact. So he wanted some sort of guarantees. And what he did was he, at least what was alleged in this Washington Post report from 1969, is that he made an agreement that the lease for Navajo Generating Station, the lease between the Salt River Project, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Navajo Nation, moved 34,000 acre feet of water into a contract between the Navajo Nation and NGS, offsetting it from Arizona's allocation of upper basin water, which is 50,000 acre feet. They take that 34,000 acre feet and set it aside in effect, so that the upper basin, so that Wayne Aspinall and upper basin voters would feel some sort of assurance that the cap would not intrude on their water distribution. And those 34,000 acre feet were understood to be Diné Navajo water rights, unresolved water claims that the Navajo Nation has between the nation and the state of Arizona for waters in the Colorado River. To this day, the Navajo Nation has no rights to have unrealized rights, unrecognized rights, unquantified rights to the Colorado River. In theory, based on Winter's doctrine, we should have some rights, but those things have not been established to this point. And we're not getting water into the Navajo Nation from the Colorado River, even though it defines our western boundary. Whereas communities in like Salt Lake City and others are importing water from the Colorado Basin because, of racism. That's the key goal. That's that's the key takeaway there. Now, this whole infrastructure, it sounds very abstract. It's very much of a 30,000 foot viewpoint, but the way it's experienced on the ground looks a little bit more like this. It's hard to detect all of the details of the way colonialism works at this large level. What we see on the ground in Navajo Nation when NGS is constructed is the making of this coal economy. The new mines are being opened, the railways are constructed, the power plant is built, jobs are created, revenues are directed towards the tribal government. It's a whole kind of lifestyle, a whole kind of livelihood built out of that infrastructure that becomes an important part of the Navajo economy, which it becomes a disposable energy source for CAP. So it becomes really critical for the Navajo Nation, disposable for the settler colonial communities, showing the kind of inequalities between the two places. And you can see that in the way that some of the impacts of coal with the closing of the Navajo Generating Station and the closing of the Kayenta mine. One of the things that is not really talked about are the hundreds of jobs that are lost right there. In 2019, 265 people were made redundant before, or had to switch into work in other mines and transferred to other places. But 65 people were employed one day and were looking for employment the next. 440 historically has a mine and power plant supported. Now, there have been a lot of environmental impacts from this coal economy. With the Black Mesa mine for many years, thousands of acre feet were being pumped in the form of a coal slurry to move coal 273 miles to Laughlin, Nevada, where that generating station was. And then there was the Kayenta mine also used a lot of water for its operations. And if you can think about some of the land that's lost, often we think about land lost through settler colonial dispossession, through jurisdictional loss, right? Like, land becomes privatized, like in the form of the General Allotment Act, or in the railroad grants, there's land that was part of a treaty guarantee and then that's taken for private purposes. There's also ways that land is lost by the form of extractive industries. If you're using land for mining, if you're using it for uranium, if it becomes contaminated, that's land that you can't use for other purposes. This is not factored in often in the way we think about land loss. But it is in effect the same thing. It's land that you can no longer use for sustainable economies. Now that we have this great difference between the state of Arizona and the Navajo Nation, we are the last ones that are being considered for water rights in the state. And we sit right in the middle of the basin. We define its boundaries between the lower and the upper basin. It goes right through our nation. And we still don't have rights to the Little Colorado River or the Colorado River. And what little water is left, the state of Arizona comes to the Navajo Nation, tries to pressure us to agree to a more limited use of that water, both in what we can do with it, and also how much we can get in the form of water settlements. And these are pictures I took a decade ago when then Senator McCain and Kyle went to the Navajo Nation in Tuba City to try to persuade the Navajo Nation Council and Hopi Tribe to settle its claims to the Little Colorado River, and also extend the lease for the Navajo Generating Station for another 25 years, which, eventually neither of those things happened. So, but that was the pressure that the state was putting on the tribe. Now, I want to move to the conclusion by showing how Indigenous people of various ages and generations are critiquing this narrative and this infrastructure and these infrastructures. So this is a picture on the left that I took in downtown Phoenix, near the site where the Colorado River Basin Act that funded CAP was signed into legislation. So it was passed by Congress and then signed by then President Johnson in 1968 at the Westward Ho Hotel. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner a picture of that signing ceremony. There's Carl Hayden, whose name sits above the Glen Canyon Dam. You can see the Carl Hayden Center or whatever with a big fountain in front of it. That's named after this guy who is also opposed to civil rights legislation. You can think about his legacy, but he's signing this. He's shaking Johnson's hand. This happened here in the Westward Ho Hotel. Just a little bit ways from that, across a dorm at the ASU downtown campus, was this mural that was painted in 2013 that's critiquing that Colorado River Basin Act, that's critiquing the water rights regime within Arizona. And it's critiquing it by incorporating the history of coal on the Navajo Nation and its impact with Phoenix and the making of Phoenix. And so you can see, basically what I've said in 30 minutes or more is said here in one panel of a mural. It's showing you how the coal power plant is feeding the Central Arizona Project, representing this pipeline that is going towards Phoenix for superficial use, for golf courses, for wasteful usage. And in the center of this mural are the centerpieces of Diné philosophy and cosmology that are, and the Salt River Nations. You have the first man, first basket, changing woman, birth of the warrior twins. These are important parts of our philosophy and our history that is now in the center in showing us going towards a different kind of environmental ethics on the right side of the panel, which is emphasizing traditional agriculture and sustainable energy technologies. Now, there's plenty of room for critique for renewable energies and other kinds of things, but it's trying to gesture toward renewable and less carbon intensive energy sources and away from these carbon intensive sources that have historically powered CAP and probably continue to power CAP. We don't know where CAP gets its power. And I like to feature something called political sovereignty for Indigenous nations, and to show that actually it's not just in the form of murals and artists and even just Indigenous activists and organizers, but our tribal governments embody these values often. Sometimes they don't, but many times they do. And you can see that in a totally different seal, like comparing the seals of the state of Arizona and the Dine Nation, that the Dine Nation prioritizes the landscape as it exists. It has the mountains have a meaning. In this case, you can see this is called I don't speak the language, but Baba Cuevari Peak. It's a very important peak for the Dine Nation. And then you have the saguaro cactus and the natural landscape, and it's prioritized as it exists and as it sustains the people historically, going back to time immemorial, and not about environmental transformation, not changing the environment to fit your needs, but adjusting your lifestyle to fit the environment. So when we want to look towards a new direction, we can look toward the political sovereignty of nations, the environmental ethics that are embedded in our laws, our codes, and our customs. So I'll end it there and take questions that people might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curley. That's wow. I've been taking a lot of notes. That was it's just an astonishing amount of exposure of concepts and information that seem so obvious when you the way that you describe them, and clearly has not either been obvious or has been not palatable to policymakers and leaders in Arizona. One of the things that really jumped out at me was earlier on in the presentation, you talked about, dams have a massive environmental impact. And of course, they are a monumental physical representation of colonialism, right? But sort of made me think it's sort of a hiding in plain sight, right? These huge, they are monuments to colonialism and to resources taken away from Indigenous people. And I particularly liked as your comments on what constitutes natural, right, or returning. How do you measure that? Have you seen through, as you're doing your work and as you're talking to folks, do you see that there's any evolving understanding of that this was never natural, right? And the impacts to people, communities, the environment are, they're incalculable, really, from those early dam projects.
Yeah, I think more people are becoming aware of the limitations of this thinking because they run up against natural limitations, right? We're seeing this in the way that the Colorado River, just like looking at the declining reservoir lines and saying, oh, look at this, this is actually something we can observe and we can actually see the river retreating. Maybe the river has agency and the river is not cooperative with our colonial projects. We just assumed that it would be, and it's not. And so now many of us, not just Indigenous nations, but non-Indigenous peoples, people who also desire a more sustainable future, are thinking about how do we rework these systems. And it's really the older generation of non-native policymakers who are kind of holding us to these old systems, the old water laws and energy infrastructures. But I think, just generally talking to people on the ground, people would be more than happy to abandon these ways of thinking and to work towards a different kind of water distribution. Indigenous, often we put Indigenous nations as if they're in a binary against non-native peoples. And it's like, if we look back at our history, we were always accommodating people coming in and needing to or wanting to live in these places. And I know some people might argue with me, but I just want to say, I don't think it's about exclusion. It's not like an opposite kind of exclusion. It's to prioritize the kind of environmental politics that existed before this other stuff was imposed on us, right? We're happy to have neighbors and to have people live amongst us and to share the resources in a way that respects the land, that respects the water, and that respects us fundamentally. Right. And it's all been the opposite, up until this point. And so, it's not to come up with this other kind of maybe might be seen as a utopian dismantlement or degrowth theory of change, but it's to say we can rework Tucson and Phoenix to exist without destroying the Colorado River, without destroying the groundwater, without denying Indigenous political sovereignty.
Well, that seems like really the key. As you mentioned, political sovereignty. You need a seat at the table that has real teeth in it to be able to affect this kind of change. Do you see pathways that have promise with respect to having a line of sight to being able to gain some power and authority, some sovereignty enough to actually be able to influence some of the change that is going to happen, right? For these urban areas to be able to survive, they're going to have to do something.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we try to not do, or gosh, I feel like if we withhold from conforming to the Colorado Compact, to the terms of the Colorado Compact, we continue to open up a space of hope for not having the water completely colonized in the way that it has been. And I think we, as the Diné Nation, the Hopi tribe, the Havasupai, the Paiutes, the other nations, if we come together and we tell the state of Arizona, the city of Phoenix, Tucson, whatever, what we expect of the river and what we expect of water usage, and propose an alternative regime outside of the Colorado Compact, it's not going to be immediately accepted. And we don't have the kind of political power within the US federal system that is premised on the denial of indigenous sovereignty. But I think we can push toward it, and we can articulate an alternative vision for the future of the river that is not held back by dams, and that is not channeled into Phoenix in the form of these canals and these kind of high modernist ideas of infrastructure that are almost like national monuments across the Western landscape.
Right.
And so I think that's important, that we don't cede that ideological ground, that we don't cede that. And if you look into our own tribal laws and our own codes, we do have like things that are seen as some people term these things like the rights of nature or natural law or those kinds of things. And we do have those sometimes articulated in our laws. My friend and colleague or comrade Janine Yazi, she works a lot on this. She's now at the Indian Collective, and you can look at her work and see how she's been talking about this, or even like the organization Colonial, which has proposed or Black Mesa Water Coalition, or there was a talk that I saw at the U of A not too long ago by Winona LaDuke, and she was talking about her nation and how they had incorporated natural law into their tribal code. And so I think even though like these regimes, these governments are problematic in a lot of ways, we are retooling them in ways that can get at an older philosophy towards the environment. Like I was showing you with the state seal from the Colonial Nation, right? It's very different than what you see in the state of Arizona. So this is a long-winded way of answering your question. I don't know if it's satisfactory, but that's as best I got right now.
No, it's great. And it kind of goes along with the question we have from the audience, and I'm going to butcher her name, I hope not, but Kate McGargle from the University of Utah, which she noted where our irresponsible water usage continues to escalate, says, I'm curious if you can contextualize how some of the recent legislative actions impact Native access to water and the issues you raise. I'm thinking things like the Utah Navajo Water Rights Settlement Act and the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, okay, very good question. And I was just in Utah, actually, for a conference on railways in Native America, which actually helped inform how I was thinking about land here. But yeah, so we did have a settlement between the Navajo Nation and the state of Utah. That was going in the opposite direction than what I'm talking about. Although I think, communities that are there would argue, yes, we need some of the infrastructure. Where it becomes kind of this, I hate to use this term, but like a Faustian bargain, these water settlements, because it's like, water lawyers will use this cliche. They say, oh, what we're trying to promote is wet water, not paper water. And you can have these abstract ideas about what water is, and you can have these like claims, but like if you really want to get water into your communities, you got to settle, you take what the state will give you, and sometimes those include some monies for small scale infrastructure. They're never large scale infrastructure. And so here's a crucial difference. So when you get something like the Utah water settlement, you're going to get small pipelines going to communities in Utah, Navajo communities in Utah, but you're not going to get like the mega projects and major pipelines, which we've been asking for, which is exactly what Phoenix got, in 1968. for future growth, right? We're never given projects for future growth. It's just for existing needs, needs that have been not met for decades, right? It's like we're going to meet deficit needs. We're not going to even give you water that fulfills that and extends beyond it. So I think, like, yeah, you know, when you get into the details, the day in, day out policy making as a tribal official, you can see how they get to the point where they agree to these settlements and think they're good deals. And in the case of the Utah water settlement, it's not as controversial as the Little Colorado River settlement. There's not an extension for a power plant lease for another 25 years, like what was originally proposed with the Little Colorado River settlement. So it's a complicated picture. But in the end, what we're not getting are major water projects or major infrastructure spending. We're getting small scale infrastructure spending. We're not getting major infrastructure spending.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's something I would critique Jonathan Nez on. I think he's been weaker on advocating for water than other presidents in the past. But or maybe he's consistent with many of our presidents in the past, but weaker than I would ideally like. But you know, he would probably disagree with me. So you can zoom him in here and have him give his set of his take on it.
Well, wait, we have.
Sorry if I didn't answer your question, but again, I tried my
Yeah,
best.
no, you did absolutely. No, that was great. Sort of more of a specific question from one of our friends, Marietta Eaton, asked, has industry retrofitted any of their infrastructure from cap impacts to accommodate Navajo communities in their sphere of prior impact?
I am not sure I understand the question. Have industry retrofitted their use of water?
Or I think of any of the infrastructure that has shifted. Has it been repurposed maybe for useful needs?
I mean, specifically around the Navajo generating station. So when that power plant was scrapped, we did make an agreement to get and purchase, I think, parts of like a warehouse, warehouse that used to be part of the Navajo generating station, and a pump that sits in Lake Powell and was pumping water into the Navajo generating station. So we got a pump, we got a warehouse. I think the rail tracks are still intact. The rail tracks that took the coal from the Kayenta mine up into near Page. So we got this rail that sits there.
Right.
We don't really know what to do with it, but we got those things.
Right. No, I know. Yeah. So maybe helpful would not be a good description of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what they envision is like, is a large water pipeline along the western end of the reservation. This has been a major project that we've been advocating for a long time. And that was something that the Navajo Nation had agreed to. They said, we will agree to settling our lower basin claims. This was in a 2010 settlement. If you give us this western end pipeline.
Right.
The bigger pipeline than what's being proposed by Kyle and other in the state of Arizona. It would have brought a lot of water into the western end of the reservation, water that was desperately needed during the COVID pandemic. But I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but during the early phases of it. But and so I think what they're thinking when they bought that pump was that then they can withdraw water from Lake Powell and then put it into this pipeline. So in their minds, I think that these are Navajo lawmakers planning this, not state and federal lawmakers. We are planning for our own futures, even if the state is not.
Is that the Navajo Gallup water supply project?
That's on the other end of the reservation. That's
okay.
coming from the San Juan River settlement. Yeah. So that's a different pipeline. So that is a big pipeline, but it's connecting two colonial communities together. It's connecting Farmington and Gallup. So the federal government's like, yeah, we'll build a pipeline when white people are involved.
Right.
And then you can tap into it if we go across your line. So
feeder line, right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a more sordid history behind that, because part of our San Juan River settlement included moving water, 7,200 acre feet of water from the San Juan River basin into Window Rock, Fort Defiance, and St. Michael's. So we were supposed to extend off of that Gallup pipeline and bring it into Arizona. And then Senator Kyle removed that from the final legislation and said, you're not going to get any of that water that's paper water as wet water until you settle the other claims you have with the state of Arizona. So as the Arizona senator, he denied Arizona residents who were Navajo water. I don't know if he does that with the white residents, but he did that for Navajo residents. He denied infrastructure water that the state of New Mexico was willing to concede, water that it was willing to concede, in order to hold it as leverage against the Navajo Nation for future water settlements.
Wow, I did not know about that one. That's yeah.
Good job, Kyle. And now I think
Yeah.
he has a name. He has like some building named after him at ASU or something.
Probably.
So, yeah.
So somebody kind of recalled in your talking about how much Navajo groundwater was required to fuel the coal facilities. What's going on with that now? Does that water that is no longer being used in that capacity belong to the Navajo Nation?
It does. It does belong to the Navajo Nation. And yeah, this groundwater is understood differently than surface water.
Okay.
And we just been using it, and it's underneath our territory, and it's been what we've been using as rights. We've been selling that water to Peabody Coal for its operations for many years. So that's, in practice, a right that we've been utilizing for a long time.
Of course, it's impossible to get through one of these presentations without mentioning Deb Haaland and wondering if there are some the expectations and hopes that are pinned on her while she's still wrapped in the federal bureaucracy. I feel terrible for her.
I think I've been proved wrong about Deb Haaland. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing her name. But like I came in as a much more skeptical and as a naysayer. I tend to be a naysayer about things. But I think she's done some good work in areas. I mean, she's really emphasized the boarding school issue, the legacies of basically kidnapping Indian children and putting them in the boarding schools, and kind of the intergenerational harm that's caused. There's a number of other things that I'm just not recalling at the moment, but things that have surprised me that she's actually been effective at changing. So, I mean, I think there are real limitations working within a colonial government, but I think she's done better than I expected.
Right. No, good. And maybe obviously the water issue is hard to ignore, so hopefully that will be on her radar as well. Question, maybe a hopeful question, that if the Navajo Nation was able to get dedicated water rights restored, what are some of the possibilities under that scenario? What do you think the nation would be able to do with that?
I mean, we do have water rights that were awarded through the San Juan River water settlement. So you can look at that as kind of like what we can expect, and we can look at what the proposed settlements are and what we can expect. There's like, okay, you can use X amount of water. That's the first feature, the quantitative nature that you're guaranteed. And then, the purpose is, can you use it for municipal industrial use? Somewhat. What are your priority claims? If in case of drought, do you have a greater priority over other users? And what are your guarantees of water? And this has been beneficial for other Indigenous nations who have settlements now that we're going into mandatory reductions, where they're still guaranteed some of their water because of the settlements. But these are nations that were in much more advantageous positions than we are. They're right along CAP, so they're already connected to CAP. They have different kinds of claims to waters that the city of Phoenix has been using. So it's not. So I think it's important we don't homogenize the water experience, the water settlement process for the 22 Indigenous nations in the state of Arizona, and often when John McCain came up to Tuba City, he was like, oh, we've signed X amount of, I forget the number, we've had X amount of water settlements and everybody's happy. Well, some are happy because they do get good deals out of it, but we're not getting those deals because we're not right at the mouth of CAP like Gila River is. So it's different for us than other nations. So I think and there's all sorts of trapdoors that are in the settlements. Like, for example, the water settlement is saying that, okay, if you agree to this water settlement, you can no longer put land into trust unless it goes through an act of Congress. It's like, what does that have to do with water? It's about more, it's about solidifying colonialism. It's about solidifying the reservation boundary so it doesn't, so we don't get land back, basically, in effect. So these are some of the things that are buried in water settlements, have nothing to do with water, that are part of this like concert of activities of colonialism, especially from the state of Arizona, that takes an adversarial approach toward and tribal nations. It's often coming at us adversarially.
No, clearly.
I'm a state employee too, so I should probably as a state employee.
No, you
Now Doug Ducey's gonna fire me.
you're a professor. I don't, well, yeah, there'll be a line of people preventing Doug Ducey from getting to you.
It's okay, he's gonna leave office soon. I'm probably below him right now, unfortunately.
We're right at 5 o'clock and we want to respect your time. I did want to point out some of the comments in the chat around the kind of history that you have presented and opened people's eyes to. We had someone mentioning that it is so disturbing, and even though they knew about it in general, the names and the faces and the documents that you presented certainly makes it even more disturbing. But getting that information out to the public and to our audiences is critical, and we're so grateful for your good work, and thank you so much for sharing it with us today. We hope to keep in touch and get you out here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Curley. We'll hope to see you in the future.
All right, have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.